Welcome to today's Todd Talk, where we take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. This is one video in a series of videos on public speaking that can be found on the website www.thegiftedguy.com/Todd Talks. The idea of these videos are twofold. The first thing that I want to accomplish with these videos is to have a place for students to go and get advice on what they can do to make their public speaking skills better. What are things that they could be doing to improve it? What are things that will help them in their journey to becoming a public speaker? So that's the first thing. The second thing is this is also designed for teachers. I want teachers to be able to come and to see things that they might want to look for or different ways that they can approach teaching public speaking, because we can't just expect students to publicly speak. We have to develop those skills, but we have to know what skills to develop. We need to know what specifically could we be doing with students to help to build those and strengthen those. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about creating a classroom where it's a safe space to give a public speech. The reason this is important is it's intimidating alone to give a speech. So when you're giving a speech in front of an audience, you have anxiety, you're frightened, your adrenaline is pumping, regardless of the audience. It could be your family, it could be the nicest people in the world, and you're still going to have those things. So imagine that you are in a space where you don't feel like what you're saying is being heard, where you feel like you're being judged, which is one of the greatest fears that people have, is that they're being judged. So how do you create a classroom where students don't feel that? They're probably going to be anxious and nervous and all those things anyways, but what can you do on your end to ensure that that space is one that is a safe place to speak and where they don't feel like there's these outside variables that are affecting their ability to publicly speak? So we're talking about 3 contributors to the safe space in your classroom. The first, of course, are peers. So fellow students. Now, you may ask, why peers? Well, because peers are the audience. They make up a majority of the audience. So as a result, you need to make sure that that audience knows how to behave and knows how to help students become better speakers. And so there's a couple things to think about. First off is audience etiquette. So as an audience, what are some things you need to do? You should be paying attention and not working on something else or seeming like you're distracted. You should be making eye contact with the speaker just as they should be making eye contact with you. Secondly, when someone finishes speaking, there should be applause. No matter how bad or how good the speech was, they want to know, that applause lets them know you're in a safe place. So give applause. And then lastly is the ability to give effective feedback. With my students, I often will ask the class themselves as an audience, what is something that you think that the student did really well? And that student will give some feedback, and it should be effective feedback, which I'll talk about in a second. And I'll ask another student, what is something that this person could improve upon? Effective feedback is very specific. It's not general. I'll give you an example of ineffective feedback. Great job. What was great about it? What specifically did the student do? What can you point to say, this is what made it great? So you might want to say, when you told that story about how you used to walk your dog, I thought that really added and connected me to, it was great. So that's something very specific that the student can say, oh, okay, so a story helped me to connect. So maybe I should use that next time. You also want to make sure that when they're giving feedback that's not necessarily good feedback, but not negative feedback either, but it should be positive. So in other words, if you're saying to a student, if someone says to a student, I had trouble understanding you, that's not helpful, because what was it? Was it the pace? Was it the fluency? Was it the volume? What was it specifically that made it not understandable? So you need to make sure that when students are giving feedback, that feedback is specific, it's actionable. It's something that the student is concrete, that the student can say, okay, I did this, or I did not do this. And so it's really important for them to have that effective feedback from their peers. And then what you can do, what I do with my students, is before they give the speech to the entire class, they give the speech to a peer. So they work with one other student, and they give each other speeches to one another. And I give them a checklist for things to look for. So what should you be looking for in a speech such as this? And they can check off whether it was done or not. And then that helps to drive their feedback. They can say, okay, this one was checked, so I saw this, you did this well. This one is not checked. I didn't experience that, or I didn't see that. Is that something that you want to add? And then through this peer feedback, students can then take their speeches and make them better based upon the comments that fellow students give them. So teaching students how to give effective feedback is going to be really helpful, not just for after the speech, but even before the speech. So that's something that you need to train students to do. It's not something that they will inherently know how to do, because as a society, we tend to go to the negative. We tend to criticize what's wrong with it. And there's nothing wrong with criticizing things that need to be worked on, but you need to frame it in a way that's effective and that is positive. The second contributor to the safe space classroom is you, the teacher. This is really important. I am someone that tends to be somewhat sarcastic. And for the first few years of teaching, I used the sarcasm a lot, especially if it was the end of the day, or if it was the end of the week, or it was getting towards the end of the school year. My patience would wane and I would throw out a sarcastic comment here or there, not understanding the power of my words and how that one comment could really be hurtful to a student, even though it wasn't intended to be that way. So even if you're trying to be funny, we don't want to ever be making fun of a student, even if there's someone you joke with all the time. And you, by saying something funny to them, that's just the rapport that you have. You don't want to do that when it comes to public speaking. You want to make sure that when you're giving them comments that, again, it's positive in nature. Doesn't mean you can't criticize, but you can do so in a positive manner. So that's one thing, is that you want to make sure you check your sarcasm or check your jokingness at the door, so that students, because what sarcasm and joking are forms of judgment. And we don't want students to have those forms of judgment. The second thing that you need to do is maintain the safe space. So the other students, make sure that they know what the norms of the classroom are that you create together. That applause should happen, that you should be paying attention during a speech, and you should be enforcing that and making sure that's going on. So keep in mind, you're managing your audience. You have to make sure that audience is keeping their end of the bargain, that they are making sure that they are keeping the safe space for the person who is presenting. And then you have to make sure that you scaffold for success. So that comes in the planning. You can't just expect a student to have skills. You have to teach them those skills, and that's what these videos will help you to do. In addition, you can't assume that they can go out there and give a 20-minute speech right away. So start small. Start with topics that they know about. Start with things that they feel comfortable and safe talking about. Sometimes the topic itself cannot be safe. And so, especially if the teacher's assigning it and the student's doesn't really care about it or is passionate about it. So give them the opportunity to make choices themselves, especially at the beginning, when they're just trying to get their feet underneath them and they're trying to get comfortable with the act of public speaking. The third thing that you want to make sure that is a contributor to the safe space is themselves. So what do I mean by this? So these are, some students tend to be very self-deprecating for themselves. They will think that they did a horrible job, even though that's not necessarily the case. So there are some things that you can do to help with this. I had a student, before he'd even start the speech, he would say, "This is going to be a horrible speech." And he did this as a way of deflecting, I believe. But it just started him off with the wrong attitude. And so I would say to him, "Richard, no, let's not think that way. Let's change our mindset and let's think, what is this? What could be?" Okay, and because whenever he gave a speech, they were not horrible. They were actually pretty good. And yet he always had this really negative attitude. You also have students who are perfectionists. And so one thing you need to make very clear to students is that there is no such thing as a perfect speech. Even the best speeches given in history had things that could have been improved. So you need to change their mindset from, "I have to do a perfect speech," to, "I need to do a speech and learn from what I did," both positive and things that didn't go as well as you wanted them to. Each speech should be a learning experience for the next speech, because that's how you get better. As you give speeches, you start here and you learn from that and you learn from that and you keep learning things. I've been public speaking for nearly 35 years, And what I can tell you is that I am constantly learning new things about public speaking and trying to make things better when it comes to my public speaking. I know I am under no illusion that I have ever given a perfect speech. And so, but I do have the mindset that I'm going to be working on that. And so these perfectionist students, you need to change their mindset and make sure that they're seeing things as an opportunity to learn, not as an opportunity to be perfect or to wow people or whatever. It's a learning experience. The last thing is you got to make sure that they hear the effective feedback. As teachers, sometimes we'll grade using a rubric and we'll slide that rubric back to the student or hand it to them, and they'll be okay. That's the grade I want, and they won't look at the comments, so they won't look at the feedback. So I always had meetings with my students where I would sit down with them and we would go, oh, before I'd even tell them what I said, I would ask them this question: how do you think it went? What do you think you did well? What do you think you could improve? And so this gives me their perspective and allows them to have a voice in matters. And then I would go to the rubric and I would say, okay, this is what I saw. And I would specifically use the rubric. And we would talk back and forth as a conversation, not me just talking at them, but as a conversation to say, okay, remember when you did this? Oh, yeah, okay. Well, that was something that was really effective because of this reason. Or I didn't see this. Is there some way, what could you have done to have included that? So you want to make sure that they are hearing the effective feedback because it's the only way they're going to get better. If they don't hear the effective feedback, they're just going to keep repeating the same things over and over that they don't want to. So we need to make sure that they're hearing that effective feedback. So if you take care of these three contributors to the safe space, which are the peers, yourself, and the students themselves, then you can almost guarantee that you're going to have a safe space. Can you guarantee that students still won't be nervous? Absolutely not. But you can control what can be controlled. And that's what you want to do.